All right, now for some fun stuff. This is going to be a long one. I'm not even going to try to sugarcoat it. We are going to go into level design and using the terrain editor. There's a lot to know, but it is a very powerful tool within Unity. And now we can actually start to make things look good. Start to make things look like a real game. So I know how much it's going to hurt to get rid of it, but we are going to delete the ground and get rid of it. All right, so our objects are now floating in space. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a game object under 3D objects called terrain. Okay, we talked about this, one of the first videos I showed this, I believe. We're going to click that, and we are going to get a massive, absolutely massive, whoa, massive plane added to our scene. Okay, now you will notice that this plane, even though the scale right now is 1 by 1 by 1, this thing is huge. All right, so what I want to do is I actually want to scale it down. I'm going to go maybe 0.1. Oh, I could have linked that. So just let's go 0.1 by 0.1. I don't know why it's not working. It's not scaling. Oops, I know what happened. We had the wrong object selected. No, that wasn't it. You know what? Let's just try the scale tool on it and let's see what happens here. All right, it keeps selecting the canvas every time because this object is just so big. Here we go. And now we're going to move it. I want to move it under our character somewhere over here. Now, the reason that it makes it so gigantic is because the idea here would be that you could build an entire world within this object that it has, that it creates. But for our purposes, what we're going to do, we are simply going to shrink it down just enough so it's at least manageable, because the way it was just way too big. All right, and I understand Unity's reasoning. Again, if you have a whole like open world type of a game, you need an entire map, you probably want something huge, but even that is so big, we're gonna still use it. Okay, so we've got this world that he can now walk in, and if we press play here, we should see that we can pretty much walk forever. Well, not forever, obviously we're gonna hit the end at some point, but we can walk for a long time. This gives us a lot of room to create something that is going to be fairly large of an environment for this guy to explore. You'll notice when you add a terrain, it gets added to your, obviously to your sample scene as a terrain. I'm going to just call it, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let's double click player instead. Let's get back to the player. I'm going to just call it, I'm going to rename it World 1. Doesn't really matter. And this chest will now become what we're picking up. This will be our new pickup, so we can actually delete, we'll delete these for now. We'll get rid of these pickups. Just get rid of them. Okay, so they're gone. And this chest right now is not a rigid body. It doesn't respond to any sort of gravity, so we are going to add a rigid body to it. Boom. It's now a rigid body, and it should respond to gravity. Although we might not need that, because the idea I have for this is that we are going to actually have to find the chests. Whoa, I must have made that way too small. Yes, I did. Let's go 10. Even that's too small. 30. That's too small. I'm looking in relation to the guy. 50's a little big, but it's okay. So let's just test that. Let's just make sure the sizing of this. Ooh, and it didn't respond. We had a mesh collider on it and a rigid body. Why did it not respond to the terrain? It should have hit the terrain. Let's get rid of our mesh collider on this. Remove that. And actually, let's get rid of the rigid body because we're not going to need it. We'll just add a box collider instead to it. Box collider. We're just changing this thing up. It's not a super important point because it's, but basically these will become the things that we're going to pick up. All right, and I might even go as far as applying the script that we have. The pickup object script, and we're going to apply it to the chest. Okay, so now the chest is the pickup object. Let's just test that out. Let's play. This is all set up for before we kind of get going. And yeah, there we go. Now it acts as a pickup. Okay, so now we're going to actually get into the fun part. This is the part I absolutely love. Okay, we are going to start creating the world that we want this game to live inside of. All right, now if we were making like a platformer game, we would have all of our platforms created that we could use, or if we were making a racing game, we could make the track pieces. But in this world, it's going to be an open world type of a game. So we're going to use Terrain Editor, and we are basically going to create the world that this guy is living inside of. And there are a few options inside of Terrain Editor, and each one of these is very, very important in order to sort of figure out how this world is going to look. All right, so let's start. We're going to skip assign the neighbor terrains because that's only when we're having multiple giant maps. We're going to go to paint terrain. Now, paint terrain is not exactly as you would expect it to be. Paint terrain is actually painting the height and the low points and the high points of your map. So with the first option, which is raise or lower terrain, we are going to actually create some hills and valleys. And the way we do that is just by clicking and raising up our mesh like so in the world around our guy. Now again, I think I showed this earlier on. The secret here is to set it to a low setting so you don't go crazy. But I'm going to kind of make this sort of I'm going to have to sort of imagine that this guy is inside of a bit of a valley here where we're going to have a little village, I think, inside of this area surrounded by big hills. And so we'll have some higher ones and lower ones. And this will become important later when we're getting into texturing and all that good stuff. Actually, we're going to be doing that right away. So you can see there's kind of a valley that this guy is inside of. And game developers will do this type of stuff all the time because they'll try to sort of hide the background or areas that the player can't go. You notice now that my chest is getting moved a bit here into the terrain. Don't really want it to clip into the terrain, so I'm going to just kind of move it to a spot where it's free, somewhere about here. Okay, cool. Now all this back here is nice and flat. And so I might actually just take my character, take my player block and move that as well all the way back. Now remember, he's linked to the camera, so the camera's going to come with him. But maybe let's put him in this sort of flat area back here. Now let me tell you guys, you can spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours building a world, building your maps and levels, and just like in any game that you probably already play, a lot of time is spent building the worlds that the players move around in. And so you'll see now we've got some hills and we've got this sort of terrain. One thing I forgot to mention is if you want to bring the hills down, you hold shift, and shift will actually shrink the hills. So by left clicking will bring it up, hold shift and you can bring it down. So you got some control. You can change your brush shape and all the rest of it, and you can really, really randomize this terrain. Now, right now it doesn't look like much. And if I play it, yes, it's got some hills and it's got this sort of cubey look. You'll see he kind of just sort of slides up and down. We're gonna have to fix that. He screws up quite a bit as well. We're gonna fix all that, don't worry. But for right now, we simply have him within this sort of cubed checkerboard world where there's not much going on. So let's make this look like something. We're gonna go back on our assets. I'm going to actually create a folder, and I'm gonna call this terrain objects. Okay, and terrain objects is going to contain all the things that sort of make our world look a little interesting. The chest could have been inside this as well, but it's okay. It's outside of it for now. And if you look inside the folder that I've provided, inside the file that you can get, there are going to be a bunch of things that we're going to use to dress this up. The one that we want right now is the tile sets. Okay, so tile sets, we're going to drag that into terrain objects. Okay, and that's going to come in. All right, tile sets. Inside of tile sets, you're going to see we have a grass tile, a mud tile, and a rock tile. And you can get as many of these as you want. Just look up tileable textures and you can find any one that you want. And so we're going to click the terrain. We're going to switch on this pull down. You can see that we can paint holes if we want, have holes in the map. We're going to go to paint texture. Paint texture is where we're going to actually apply these tiles. All right, so these tiles are going to be our textures that are going to be painted onto the object. So let me show you how that works. It's actually really, really cool. So right now, we don't have any terrain. We have the default standard terrain. And if we edit that, you'll notice that we don't have anything, no shaders, nothing is on there at the moment. All right, so what we need to do is we need to create a terrain layer. All right, I believe we're going to create a layer, and we're going to select a 2D terrain, which in this case will be, if we find it, we can actually just search for it. Our grass tile will be our default terrain layer. If we click that, now you will notice that the whole entire grid is replaced with our grass. Okay, pretty cool. You'll notice because it's tileable that it tiles nicely, and now our entire boring checkerboard now becomes a field. But as you already know, if you play video games, you know that you're not going to just have grass all over your world, because that would be pretty boring. So we also want to add something else here. Let's go to this once again and let's add a layer. And this layer is going to be the mud tile. Okay, and we should be able to get it. Whoops. Sorry. Edit, create a layer. We have to create a layer. And we are going to look for the mud tile. And now we'll have a second layer. Now watch how this works. It's really, really cool. So with our paint texture, right now we are set on the grass. But if we switch to mud and start to click, you will see that depending on the settings of our brush and how intense, which is set down here by the way, the intensity of it, we can control how this map transitions from one texture to another. So you can see now, just by clicking and painting a little bit, we've created a muddy area that transitions to the grass just by making a layer with different tileable textures. So I could also create one more for the rock tile. Maybe the rock tile is the mountain area. So let's say at the top of these hills, you know, we've got a rock. I'll just shrink down the brush size. By the way, to do that, it's just like in Photoshop. To shrink down your brush, you're going to use the bracket keys, which are just to the right of the P key. And that will allow you to enlarge or shrink your brushes as needed. And you can see now that we've got something that resembles sort of the peak of a mountain, I guess you could say. I'm just gonna get a little artsy-fartsy here and paint to the tops of all of these. And sometimes you'll screw up and you'll go a little too far, and I put some rock farther on, but that's the way the world is. It's random, right? It's not perfect. It's not like there wouldn't be a rock just sticking out in the middle of the world as well, right? It could be anywhere. But for right now, what I've done is I've got this sort of area where people would be walking, so it's kind of beaten down and mud. Then we got a grassy area, and then we got the rocks where the cliffs and the mountains would be. And if I really want to see this a little bit better, what I could do is I could go to my camera, which is the main camera, and I could actually lower it so I could see a little more of the terrain. So I could bring it down sort of behind him, rotate it up a little bit, and this is going to give me a slightly better view. It's also going to change the way the game looks. So now I'm right behind him, and I get a little bit of a better idea for what the world he's in looks like. Like I said, we're going to fix this problem where he really does some easy sort of flips like that. And that's all based on the collider. So we'll fix that right away too. But you can see now that it's starting to at least resemble a world that this guy could be living inside of. And now we're going to get into more of the finer details. All right, let's fix this collider issue first, and we will go on to the more detailed, finer parts of the terrain editor in a second. So in order to fix the problem with him falling over, we need to do two things. First of all, the player block, which is just the cube that he's within. First of all, we have to scale it a little bit because it is not the right dimensions. It's not the right size for this guy. And so we're going to go to our box collider. We're actually going to edit the collider, and we're going to just shrink it down so that it matches his height and width as close as we can. All right, we might have to move it a little bit. Oh, you know what? I'm going to just pull this back. I'm going to lift this up a bit. This is a little bit of guesswork happening here. Okay, there we go. The other thing we got to do is we got to go into his rigid body, and we're going to go to constraints. Okay, because what constraints will do is it will basically control whether or not he can fall over and, you know, get knocked over when he hits the landscape. And with a character, you don't really want him responding to the physics the way that you would with, let's say, a rock or a block or something that would be rolling down the hill. So in the constraints, you want to freeze the X, the Y, and the Z so that the block does not rotate and fall over. And you'll see what that does. So again, just to repeat, inside rigid body, you want to go, inside the player object, which is the cube. First of all, you want to edit the collider by clicking these little blocks, shrinking it down to our character. Then you want to go into rigid body. You want to go into constraints and turn these three on. And now when I play, you will see that he will not fall over because his rotation has been locked. He can no longer fall over because the block that he's within cannot actually, it's basically constrained so that it cannot fall over. The rotation of it is locked. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so that looks great. So I'm going to stop the video there because we're already at almost 20 minutes. And in the next part, we're going to get into the more detailed aspects of Terrain Editor. I would recommend maybe playing around with the textures a little bit with this first sort of menu, build a little world, build some mountains, and and texture it up with some rocks and mud and all that good stuff. And now next we're going to get into more of the details. All right, so stay tuned because it's going to get a lot of fun here in a quick time.